Hey guys, tonight we're gently tiptoeing back about 7 centuries into a world lit by fire and shadowed by uncertainty. You'll be a 14th century peasant, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive the first winter, but we'll try our best. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken, not to the gentle chime of a smart device, but to a chill that seems to seep from the very earth beneath you. It's dark, the kind of profound dark that modern cities have entirely forgotten. Your bed, a straw-filled pallet on the packed dirt floor, offers little comfort against the damp cold that clings to your roughly woven tunic. The first thought, even before your eyes fully adjust to the slivers of pre-dawn light filtering through cracks in the wattle and daub walls, is hunger. It's a familiar companion, this gnawing emptiness in your belly, a dull ache that's almost a part of you. You rise, your joints stiff, and shuffle towards the heart of your small, one-room dwelling. What we, with generous modern imagination, might call the kitchen. Forget gleaming countertops or stainless steel appliances. Your kitchen is, primarily, a space defined by a central hearth. This isn't a cozy romantic fireplace, it's a pit, or perhaps a slightly raised stone platform, where a fire smolders, if you were lucky enough to keep the embers alive overnight. If not, the laborious process of striking flint against steel, coaxing a spark into flame with precious tinder, is your first morning chore. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, a scent so pervasive it clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. It's a smell that, for you, means warmth, the potential for food, and a small measure of cheer against the encroaching gloom. But it also means constantly watery eyes and a persistent cough that echoes that of your parents, your grandparents. Look around your culinary domain. It's rustic. Your open concept kitchen is, well, very open, mostly to the elements and any passing rodents looking for a timeshare. There are no cupboards, no pantry as you'd know it. A few rough wooden shelves might hold a couple of earthenware pots, perhaps a wooden bowl or two, carved by your own hand or traded for. Your prized possession is likely an iron cauldron, suspended over the fire by a hook and chain, or perhaps precariously balanced on a tripod of stones. This cauldron is the workhorse of your kitchen, the vessel for nearly every meal. Maybe there's a simple knife, its blade dulled from use, and a wooden spoon, stained dark from countless stirrings. Your spice rack. Oh, that's just dirt. And maybe some slightly more interesting dirt you found near a particular plant. Spices like pepper or ginger are the stuff of lordly feasts, unimaginable luxuries for someone of your station. Salt is available, but it's coarse, gray, and not something you use with abandon. The struggle for food is the rhythm of your life, the relentless drumbeat to which every day marches. You don't just pop down to the local supermarket. The concept of choice in your diet is largely theoretical. You eat what you can grow, what you can forage, or what your feudal obligations allow you to keep. The mainstay of your diet, the fuel that gets you through long days of backbreaking labor in the fields, is pottage. This is a historical fact. Pottage, a thick, simmering stew, was the daily bread, quite literally sometimes, for the vast majority of the population. It's made from whatever grains are on hand: oats, barley, perhaps some rye, coarsely ground. Into the pot go peas, beans, and any vegetables you might have managed to cultivate in a small garden plot: onions, leeks, cabbages, turnips. If you're lucky, you might add some wild greens or herbs foraged from the hedgerows. Meat is a rarity, Perhaps a bit of bacon fat for flavor if the pig survived the winter. Or, on very special occasions, a scrawny chicken. Hunting in the Lord's forest is forbidden, punishable by severe penalties, even death. So, that juicy venison steak. Forget about it. You're more likely to be eyeing a plump field mouse with a mixture of hunger and desperation. The options are so limited that what's for dinner is less a question and more a statement of hope that there is dinner. Seasonality dictates everything. Summer and autumn bring a relative bounty, a chance to preserve what you can. Drying, salting, pickling in a rudimentary way if you have the means. But winter is the lean time, the hungry time, when the stores dwindle and the pottage becomes thinner, more watery, bulked out with whatever you can find. Sometimes, if the hunt has been particularly meager for the Lord's table, or if an animal died of disease, you might get the umbles, the offal, the innards. This is a quirky little tidbit. The term to eat humble pie is thought by some to derive from umble pie, a pie made from these less desirable animal parts. So, when you're literally eating the guts, you're being quite humble. Hygiene in this 1300s kitchen is, let's just say, different. Water has to be hauled, often from a communal well or stream that might also serve as a laundry. And, unfortunately, a bit of a sewer. You wash your hands, maybe before handling food. But soap is a luxury. Hand sanitizer. Never heard of her. Though, to be fair, they hadn't heard of most germs either. So, blissful ignorance coupled with a robust, or frequently overcome, immune system. The same pot used for cooking might also be used for washing. Bits of ash, soot, and whatever else is floating in the air invariably find their way into the food. It's all just extra texture, this constant grinding preoccupation with food, with just getting enough to survive, colors every aspect of your existence. There's an ever-present anxiety. Will the harvest be good this year? Will blight or drought or an early frost ruin the crops? Will the Lord demand too much of your meager share? Historians still argue whether the average peasant in the 14th century consistently met their minimum caloric needs or lived in a near constant state of malnutrition, punctuated by periods of actual famine. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, varying greatly by region, by year, and by sheer luck. But the edge of hunger is always there, a cliff you could easily topple over. Your kitchen, then, is not a place of culinary artistry or joyful experimentation. It's a battleground, a laboratory of survival. The smells are earthy, smoky, sometimes acrid, occasionally, if you're very fortunate, hinting at something savory. The sounds are the crackle of the fire, the bubble of the pot, the rhythmic chop of a knife against a wooden board, if you have something to chop, the scrape of a spoon against earthenware. It's a far cry from the kitchens we know, with their instant heat, their running water, their refrigerators groaning with more food than you might see in a month, or even a year, as you stare into the simmering pottage, hoping it will stretch to feed your family for another day. You understand that in the 14th century, the kitchen is the very crucible of life and death, where the daily struggle for sustenance is played out with a quiet, desperate intensity. It makes you wonder if they ever had those medieval cooking shows where a grumpy host yells at everyone for not husking the barley correctly. Probably not. Ratings would have been terrible. The first thing you encounter, perhaps even before your eyes fully adjust to the dim, smoky interior of wherever you found yourself, is the smell. It's earthy. Yes, that's a polite way to put it. A sort of damp, vegetal aroma with an underlying hint of simmering grain. This, my friend, is the olfactory overture to the star of our show, the headliner of pretty much every single meal pottage. You might also hear it A gentle, rhythmic blub, blub, blub from a dark, sturdy pot nestled amongst the embers of a fire. Or perhaps sitting on a simple trivet if things are a tad more sophisticated. This isn't some fancy chef-driven special. Oh no. This is the culinary equivalent of sensible shoes, practical, always there, and rarely exciting. This is your daily bread. If bread were a wet, gloopy substance served in a bowl. And when I say daily, I mean daily. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you're lucky enough to have all three, pottage is very likely to be the main event, the opening act, and the encore. So, what exactly is this miracle meal? This ubiquitous fuel that keeps this ancient world, or at least your small corner of it, turning you lean closer to the pot, the steam warming your face, carrying that distinctive fragrance. At its heart, pottage is stunningly simple. Think of it as a sort of culinary canvas, painted with whatever is cheap available and won't kill you too quickly. The primary ingredient, the backbone, is grain. Usually, it's something robust and not overly precious, like barley, which gives a pleasantly chewy, almost nutty texture when it's not boiled into oblivion. Oats are another common contender, lending a smoother, more porridge-like consistency. If you're a bit up the social ladder, you might find rye, or even coarsely ground wheat, thickening the mix. But for most, it's the humbler grains that form the bulk. These aren't your fluffy, refined breakfast cereals. They're often just cracked or roughly milled, retaining a lot of their bran, which, while good for, well, regularity, also adds to the rustic, shall we say, mouthfeel. Then come the vegetables. And this is where a sliver of seasonal variety might, if you're an optimist, creep in. Most of the time, you're looking at the stoic workhorses of the vegetable patch: turnips, with their slightly bitter earthy punch; parsnips, if you're fortunate, offering a hint of sweetness, a welcome surprise; carrots, though perhaps not the bright orange ones you're picturing, but paler, more ancestral versions. Cabbage is a frequent guest, its slightly sulfurous aroma contributing generously to the overall olfactory profile. Kale and other hardy greens might be wilted in, adding a touch of color, if a somewhat sludgy green counts. Onions and leeks, when available, are a godsend, providing a base layer of savory flavor that can elevate the pottage from mere sustenance to marginally less bland sustenance. And, of course, peas and beans, dried, naturally, are often thrown in to add protein and make the whole concoction more filling. Sometimes, if you're out in the countryside, foraged greens, weeds really, might find their way into the pot. A little dock leaf here, a bit of sorrel there. Every little bit helps stretch the meal. All of this is simmered in water, just plain water usually. If it's a truly banner day, the water might have had a bone or some meat scraps boiled in it previously, lending a faint, almost ghostly whisper of umami, creating what could generously be called a very, very thin broth. But don't count on it. Salt, that precious mineral, is used sparingly, if at all. It's a luxury. And this is peasant fare, remember? So the dominant flavor note is simmered regret, or perhaps more charitably, earth. Now, let's talk texture. You dip a rough wooden spoon, no polished silver here, into the pot and bring up a sample. It's substantial. It's got more body than a scarecrow in a hurricane. Depending on the grain to water ratio and how long it's been bubbling away, it can range from a thick, soupy consistency to something more akin to a very wet, lumpy porridge. Think of a modern hearty vegetable soup. Then remove most of the flavor, add more unidentifiable bits, and make it generally more gray, or perhaps like congee, but far less delicate. far more assertive in its blandness. It's not designed to be elegant. It's designed to coat your ribs, to sit in your stomach and provide slow-release energy for a day of hard labor. You can almost feel it clinging to the spoon, reluctant to let go. A preview of how it'll cling to your insides. And the taste. Oh, the taste. If your pottage tastes strongly of anything other than simmered vegetables and boiled grain, you're either very lucky or something has gone terribly wrong. It's predominantly earthy, sometimes a little bitter from the greens or turnips. Occasionally, blessedly, a little sweet if a parsnip or a less fibrous carrot has been generous. Herbs, if foraged or grown in a small patch, could add a fleeting high note. A bit of thyme, maybe some parsley. But these are often fleeting luxuries. The joy of pottage isn't in its complex flavor profile. It's in the fact that it exists. It's food. It's warm, which on a cold day or in a damp, chilly hovel is a significant comfort in itself. This reliance on pottage wasn't just a quirky local habit. It was a widespread phenomenon. It's a well-established historical fact that pottage, in various forms, served as the primary sustenance for a vast majority of the European population for centuries. From the early medieval period, well into the early modern era, it was cheap, it used readily available ingredients, and it could be endlessly adapted to whatever was on hand, or, more often, whatever wasn't entirely rotten. One rather interesting, if slightly stomach-churning, tidbit is the concept of the perpetual pottage, or everlasting stew. In some households, the pottage pot was rarely emptied or cleaned. Instead, new ingredients and water were simply added to the leftovers of the previous day's meal, creating a continuously simmering, ever-evolving concoction. Imagine the layers of flavor, or don't. While it sounds a bit grim by modern hygiene standards, the constant simmering might have kept the worst of the bacteria at bay. Maybe. It certainly saved on cleaning. The central role of this meal in the diet can't be overstated. This isn't just a side dish, it is the dish. It's your fuel, your comfort such as it is, and your constant companion. It's what you wake up to the smell of, and what you scrape the last of from your bowl before collapsing onto your straw pallet. Its importance lies in its sheer caloric efficiency and its ability to stretch meager resources. A few handfuls of grain, some common vegetables, and water could feed a family. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't glamorous, but it was, for many, the difference between going to bed hungry and having something, anything, in their bellies. The only variety you're likely to encounter is yesterday's pottage, reheated, or today's pottage, soon to be yesterday's, and a thrilling culinary cycle. You take a tentative mouthful from your spoon. It's warm, thick, and surprisingly filling. The flavors are muted, a general sort of vegetal earthiness. You can pick out the slight bitterness of some unidentifiable green leaf, the soft chewiness of the barley. It's not actively unpleasant, just profoundly unremarkable. It's the taste of survival, plain and simple, and as you swallow, you might ponder, as many have, about the long-term effects of such a diet. Indeed. Historians still argue whether the consistent consumption of such a limited grain and vegetable-based diet led to widespread chronic micronutrient deficiencies, or if the frequent addition of foraged foods, small game when available, and the occasional feast day provided just enough variety to stave off the worst effects. For now, though, you're just grateful for the warmth spreading through your stomach. This, you realize, is what keeps the world moving, one gloopy, bland, life-sustaining spoonful at a time. It's not gourmet, but it's real, and you'll probably be having it again. Very, very soon. Right then, as the last echoes of the blacksmith's hammer fade. Remember that rhythmic clang we just left behind? Well, now you find your gaze drawn outwards, beyond the village confines, towards the vast undulating tapestries that truly sustain this world. We're talking about the fields, the very heart of medieval life, and the source of what you might call the original energy bar grains, the staff of life, as they say. Though sometimes it was more of a staff you'd get beaten with if the harvest failed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You see those sprawling plots of land, carved into long strips? This is where the magic, or rather, the back-breaking labor, happens. Forget your neat, manicured lawns. These are working fields, dedicated to the holy trinity of hardy grains rye, barley, and oats. Wheat, that golden child of grains, the stuff of fluffy white bread dreams. Well, that's often a luxury, destined for the Lord's table, or the wealthier townsfolk. For most, life is flavored with the earthier, more robust character of its humbler cousins. You watch as a team of oxen, patient and immense, drags a heavy wooden plow, an aerodrome, through the soil. The farmer, or more likely, a peasant bound to this land, guides it with a steady hand, his breath misting in the cool morning air. It's slow work, the plowshare groaning as it bites into the earth, turning over rich, dark clods. This isn't your fancy GPS-guided tractor. Oh no, this is pure muscle, animal and human, working in a symphony of effort that has played out for centuries. They're likely employing the three-field system. No, a rather clever agricultural innovation for the time. One field lies fallow, resting and regaining its nutrients, basically enjoying a spa year. Another is sown in autumn with wheat or rye, and the third in spring with barley oats, or perhaps legumes like peas or beans. This rotation helped improve yields and offered a bit of insurance against one crop failing. Smart. Right. Almost as smart as inventing Wi-Fi. But you know, priorities. Rye is the dependable workhorse, tolerant of poorer soils and colder climates. It gives you that dark, dense amabre, the kind that feels substantial in your hand. A bit chewy, maybe even a tad sour. Not exactly a delicate brioche, but it fills the belly. You can almost smell its nutty, slightly sharp aroma as it bakes in those communal ovens we might explore later. Then there's barley, the versatile MVP. It too can be ground into flour for bread, often mixed with other grains. But its real claim to fame, AL. Yes, that a life-sustaining, mildly alcoholic beverage that makes the medieval world go round. It was often safer to drink than water, and certainly more cheerful. You'll see it used for animal feed as well, keeping those essential livestock going. And oats, dear old oats, primarily fodder for horses, especially those crucial war horses, but also a staple in human diets in the form of pottage, a thick, porridge-like stew that was the daily fare for many. Imagine a less glamorous, lumpier oatmeal, and you're pretty much there. It's amazing what you can get used to when your other option is, well, enthusiastic starvation. Now, let your senses drift towards the height of summer. The sun beats down, relentless. The fields, once tender green, are now a shimmering expanse of gold and amber. This is harvest time, a period of intense, almost frantic activity. The entire community, from the able-bodied men and women down to the older children, is out in the fields. You see them wielding sickles, those curved blades glinting in the sun, methodically cutting handfuls of stalks. It's precise work, stooping and cutting, stooping and cutting. Later on, the scythe, with its long blade and handle, will become more common for reaping grains, allowing a worker to cut a wider swathe with a sweeping motion, though it requires a bit more skill to avoid shattering the precious grain heads. The air is thick with the scent of ripe grain, dust, and human sweat. There's a rhythmic swish, thwack of blades, the murmur of voices, perhaps a song to keep spirits up, though it's probably more of a weary groan by midday. It's a race against the weather. A sudden downpour could ruin everything. The cut stalks are gathered and tied into sheaves, which are then propped up in stooks to dry. You can feel the prickle of the chaff on your skin just by looking, the backache settling in by proxy. It's a far cry from browsing the cereal aisle, wondering if you want the one with extra fiber or the cartoon character on the box. Isn't it? This is survival, pure and simple. And the success of this harvest dictates the harshness, or relative comfort, of the coming winter. Once harvested and threshed, a process of beating the grain to separate the edible kernels from the inedible chaff, often done with flails on a hard-packed earth floor. The real journey of your daily bread is still not over. Now, it's time for milling. You follow a peasant? Perhaps. His shoulders stooped under the weight of a sack filled with his precious grain, making his way along a well-worn path towards the mill. And this is where things get interesting, because milling is often a lordly or monastic monopoly. The lord, or the local abbey, owns the mill, and tenants are usually obligated to use it and to pay a portion of their grain as a milling toll, or multure. This could be a hefty chunk, sometimes as much as 1/16, or even more. So, you can imagine the miller wasn't always the most popular chap in the village. There's a reason Chaucer's miller in The Canterbury Tales is depicted as a brawny, cheating rogue. The old saying, "An honest miller has a golden thumb," hinted that millers were adept at pressing their thumbs onto the scales, or subtly sifting a little extra for themselves. A bit of medieval white-collar crime, if you will, just with more flour dust. You approach the mill, perhaps a sturdy water mill, its great wheel turning with a hypnotic, rhythmic splash and creak, powered by the diverted flow of a river. Or maybe it's a windmill, its sails catching the breeze, a majestic silhouette against the skyline, especially in flatter landscapes like those in parts of England or the Low Countries. Inside, it's a dusty, noisy, vibrant place. The air is thick with the fine powder of flour, coating everything in a pale film. The grinding stones, massive circular millstones, one stationary the bedstone and one rotating above it the runner stone, are the heart of the operation. You can feel the vibration through the wooden floor as they turn, their grooved surfaces, meticulously dressed by the miller or a specialist, shearing and crushing the grain into precious flour. Getting those grooves, or harps, just right was an art. A quirky tidbit for you, millstones needed regular dressing, or recutting, to maintain their grinding efficiency. A skilled and laborious job that, if done poorly, resulted in bad flour and even worse tempers. The quality of the flour varies. Some mills might produce finer flour for the lord, coarser stuff for the peasants. It's rarely the pure white flour we're used to. It's more likely to be a bit gray or brownish, full of bran and germ, giving it a nuttier flavor and, dare I say, more nutritional value than some of our modern, highly refined counterparts. Though, historians still argue whether the common peasant's diet, rich in whole grains and roughage, was actually healthier in some respects than many modern diets, despite its monotony and frequent insufficiency. It's a debate that highlights just how central this simple, ground-up grain was to every single aspect of life. From the moment the seed touched the earth to the moment the rough, hearty bread was broken at the table, grains defined the rhythm, the labor, and the very survival of the people you're observing. Forget Bitcoin. This was the real store of value, and honestly, probably less volatile. Right then, after a long day, perhaps spent in the fields or navigating the bustling, sometimes fragrant, sometimes, well, less fragrant marketplace. Your thoughts invariably turn to sustenance, and at the heart of nearly every meal, every day, is bread. You can almost smell it now, can't you? That comforting aroma, or perhaps the slightly more earthy scent of rye, if that's what your station or the season affords. Now, that grain you acquired, remember all that effort, whether you grew it yourself, bartered for it, or purchased it with carefully hoarded coins. It doesn't magically transform into a warm, crusty loaf. Oh no, if you're lucky, someone else. Perhaps the miller with his impressive water or wind-powered mill has ground it for you. For a price, of course, usually a portion of the flour itself, known as a mulcher fee. But if not, you're faced with the hand quern, that trusty, or rather embrement and arm-achingly exhausting, pair of stones. You pour the grains in, and round you grind, the rhythmic scraping a soundtrack to your aching shoulders, producing a flour that's likely a bit coarser, a bit grittier than what you might pick up in a paper bag today. Once you have your flour, be it fine wheat, hearty rye, humble barley, or even oats, the real work begins. You mix it with water, a pinch of salt if you have it and can spare it, and then comes the kneading. You thought your sourdough starter was needy, demanding attention twice a day. Try hand kneading enough dough for a family, or even just for yourself for a few days. In a world without electric mixers, you push, you fold, you turn, over and over, developing the gluten, working your arms and back until they burn. It's a proper workout, one that leaves you with a satisfyingly smooth, elastic dough. Or at least, that's the dream. Sometimes, it's just dough, and it's often the women of the household who bear this burden, their hands chapped and strong from this daily ritual. What kind of bread are you making? Well, that depends heavily on what you have, if you're in a hurry, or perhaps if leavening agents are a mystery or a luxury. You might be making a simple flatbread, cooked quickly on a hot stone or a griddle over the fire. It's dense, perhaps a little chewy, but it serves its purpose. Think of it as the ancient ancestor of your pitta or naan, but probably a good deal more rustic. If you have access to a starter, a piece of old dough saved from the last batch, bubbling away with wild yeasts, that precious leaven, then you might be aspiring to something loftier, a risen loaf. But don't picture a perfectly domed, airy sourdough masterpiece just yet. The yeasts are wild, the flour variable, the temperature control, let's just say approximate. Now, where do you bake this carefully prepared dough? A private oven is a luxury few can afford. They are expensive to build, require a lot of fuel, which is also not free, and frankly, are a bit of a fire hazard in closely packed wooden houses. So for most people, it's off to the communal oven. This might be owned by the local lord, the monastery, or a designated village baker. You'd bring your shaped dough, perhaps marked with your family's specific symbol so it doesn't get mixed up in the fiery depths. There's a schedule, of course, and often a fee, paid either in coin or with a portion of your baked bread. The communal oven is a hub of activity, a place of warmth, the air thick with the smell of baking dough, wood smoke, and perhaps a bit of local gossip. It's like the medieval version of fighting for the good washing machine in your apartment building, but with more smoke and the constant fear of a minor noble requisitioning your perfectly proved loaf because, well, they can. The quality of the bread that emerges from that oven, or from your more modest hearth, speaks volumes about your place in the world. If you're well off, you might enjoy pain de main, or Lord's bread, made from finely sifted wheat flour, resulting in a whiter, softer loaf. This is where the term upper crust supposedly comes from, the top crust of the loaf. Less likely to be burnt or sooty, was often reserved for the most important people at the table. A mainstream historical fact for you bread formed the absolute bulk of the medieval diet for most people, often accounting for up to 70 or 80% of their daily calorie intake. So, its quality wasn't just a matter of taste, but of fundamental sustenance. For the vast majority, however, the daily bread is a much darker, heavier affair. It's made with rye or barley, or wheat that includes much of the bran and germ. It's dense, perhaps a little sour, and sometimes, well, gritty. It's filling. It keeps you going, but it's a world away from the delicate crumb of a nobleman's manchet. Your dark, gritty loaf is character building, let's say. And here's a quirky tidbit sometimes. Very stale loaves of this coarse bread, days old and hard as a rock, would be sliced thickly and used as plates, called trenchers. You'd put your stew or meat on top, the bread soaking up the juices, and at the end of the meal, if you were still hungry, you might eat your trencher, or if you were feeling charitable, or it was just too far gone, you'd give it to the poor or the dogs. Waste not, one not, especially when it comes to bread. The very existence and type of your bread are tethered precariously to grain availability. A good harvest means full sacks of grain, perhaps even a surplus to store or sell. Breads might be a little larger, the flour a bit better, but a bad harvest, brought on by drought, too much rain, or blight, means lean times. The grain stores dwindle, prices soar, and the quality of bread plummets. In truly desperate times, people resort to our famine breads, bulking out precious flour with whatever they can find: ground beans, peas, acorns, chestnuts, and sometimes less savory things like tree bark or sawdust, though those are extreme cases. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of ergotism, a horrifying fungal disease resulting from consuming rye contaminated with the ergot fungus, often called St. Anthony's fire, was as widespread and consistently recognized as some sources suggest, or if its symptoms were sometimes confused with other ailments. The fear of contaminated grain, however, was very real. You inspect your flour carefully, hoping the miller was honest and the harvester clean. So, as you take your warm, hopefully not too burnt loaf from the oven, or unwrap it from its cloth if you've collected it from the communal baker, you feel a sense of accomplishment, and perhaps a little anxiety. This is your fuel for tomorrow, your comfort, your daily necessity. You eye it, judging its texture, its heft. Will it last? Will the next baking day come before hunger truly bites for now? Though the scent is good, it's a tangible result of hard work, a small victory against the constant uncertainties of life. You can almost taste it, can't you? That slightly smoky crust, the dense, chewy interior. It's not just food, it's a cornerstone of your existence. Right? So that constant, almost rhythmic grinding of grain we talked about, the sheer volume of bread and porridges. It's a lot. Your jaw probably aches just thinking about it. But even the most stoic medieval stomach craves a little something else, a bit of variety, or at least a different kind of mush to accompany the main mush. And that's where our friends, the legumes, and those hardy greens from the garden patch, make their humble entrance. You're not exactly strolling through a vibrant farmer's market here, not with overflowing baskets of rainbow chard and heirloom tomatoes. Think more. Functional. Think survival. But even in that, there's a quiet dignity. You see those rough sacks, perhaps in a corner of your small dwelling, or stored carefully by the village headman. Inside, you find the unassuming powerhouses: beans, peas, and lentils. These are the unsung heroes, the protein punch for the masses, the things that stick to your ribs when meat is a distant dream, or a once-a-season luxury. Let's start with beans. Faba beans, mostly. Broad beans. Imagine them, dried and hard as little pebbles. You'd soak them for hours, maybe overnight, in a pot of water, watching them slowly plump up, rehydrating with a stubborn reluctance. Then, they join the general melee in the cooking pot, simmering away with whatever else was on offer. The smell isn't gourmet, it's earthy, slightly beany obviously, and deeply, deeply filling. They cook down, some dissolving into a thick, almost creamy base for a pottage, others retaining a bit of their shape, offering a slightly more substantial chew than the endless grain. It's a fact, really, that for centuries, these legumes were a cornerstone of the peasant diet across Europe, providing essential nutrients that grains alone couldn't. It's not glamorous, no, but it's real. It's what keeps you going. And yes, let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room, or rather, the, symphony in the small intestine. Beans have always had their musical reputation. I guess some things truly are timeless. Then you have peas, if you're lucky. In the right season, you might experience the fleeting joy of fresh peas, popped straight from the pod. Sweet, green little bursts of flavor, but mostly dried peas, split peas, yellow or green, destined for a similar fate as the beans. A longer ducky, slow simmer into submission. They break down more readily, creating a smoother, thicker pottage. You can almost feel the slightly gritty, yet comforting texture on your tongue. Imagine stirring that pot, the steam rising, carrying that distinctive, slightly sweet, slightly savory aroma. Lentils, too, play their part. Smaller, quicker to cook. They add another dimension of texture and a slightly different, perhaps more peppery, earthiness. They're like the quiet, reliable cousins in the legume family. Always there, doing their job without much fuss. It's funny, isn't it? We still rely on these ancient foods. Think of your cozy lentil soup on a cold day, or a hearty bean chili. The connection is right there, simmering across the centuries. And for a quirky little tidbit, some ancient Greek philosophers, like Pythagoras, were famously against eating beans. The reasons are a bit murky. Something about souls, or maybe just indigestion. Who knows? But imagine a whole school of thought dedicated to avoiding the very thing keeping most of Europe fed. Philosophers. Always gotta be different. Beyond the legumes, you have the garden greens, or what passes for them. And when we say garden, it might be a small, fiercely protected patch near your hut, or perhaps access to common land where things grow with a rugged persistence. King of this domain, cabbage. Oh, the glorious, versatile cabbage. You see it everywhere. Great, dense heads of green or purplish leaves. It's hardy. It stores reasonably well, and it provides bulk. Lots and lots of bulk. You chop it and chop it, and then, most likely, you boil it for a long, long time until it's soft, yielding, and has imbued the entire cottage with its distinctive aroma. Not always a bad aroma, mind you, just a very cabbagey one. It fills the stomach, adds a different texture to the pottage, and, unbeknownst to you, provides some pretty decent vitamins. You might not be writing sonnets about its exquisite flavor, but you're grateful for it. Oh joy, you might think with a touch of gentle sarcasm as another ladleful plops into your bowl. More boiled cabbage, my favorite. But secretly, you know it's better than just plain gruel. Then, the aromatics, the flavor bringers, onions, and their milder cousins, leeks, and if you're really fortunate, a clove or two of garlic. Picture yourself, eyes watering slightly as you slice into a rough, earthy onion pulled from the damp soil. Its pungency is a welcome change. These aren't the perfectly round, uniformly sized onions you find shrink-wrapped in the supermarket. These are lumpy, a bit muddy, and absolutely packed with flavor. They form the base of so many otherwise bland meals, sweating down in the pot, releasing their sugars, adding a savory depth that elevates everything else. You'd use every part of the leek, from the white base to the tougher green tops, all simmered into oblivion. That sharp, almost aggressive scent of raw onion mellowing into something sweet and inviting as it cooks. That's a small, everyday magic. And if your luck is truly in, if the soil has been kind, or your little patch is particularly fertile, you might have root vegetables. We're not talking about those bright orange, perfectly conical carrots you get today. Think paler, perhaps whitish or purplish carrots, more gnarly, more authentic. Parsnips, with their sweet, nutty flavor. Turnips, with their slightly peppery bite. These are treasures, dug from the earth. They carry its scent, its coolness. They add sweetness, a different kind of starchiness, and a more substantial bite to the endless pottage. Historians still argue whether the average peasant had consistent access to a wide variety of root vegetables, or if it was more a take what you can get situation, a lucky find, rather than a staple. But when you do get them, they transform a meal from mere sustenance to something almost enjoyable. Imagine the slight char if you manage to roast a few pieces on the embers of the fire. The concentrated sweetness, that's a treat, even boiled. They offer a welcome change of pace, a different note in the symphony of simple flavors. So, you see, it's not just about the grain. As central as that is, these beans, peas, lentils, the humble cabbage, the pungent onion, the occasional earthy root vegetable, they are the supporting cast, the ones that add the crucial bulk, the necessary if limited variety, and those vital extra nutrients. They stretch the main ingredients, make the pot go further, and provide a different kind of satisfaction. It's a diet built on resilience, on making the most of every scrap, every plant that can be coaxed from the soil. And as you sit with your bowl, the warmth seeping into your hands, you appreciate these simple additions, these gifts from the earth that supplement that ever-present grain, making life just that little bit more bearable, one spoonful at a time. Right then, after all that talk about the, shall we say, robust and somewhat monotonous fare that usually fills your belly, that coarse bread, remember, the one that gives your jaw a real workout and the endless pottage simmering away, you might find yourself dreaming, just idly fantasizing about something a little richer, a little creamier. You might be craving the rare, almost mythical luxury of dairy. For you, living in this time, dairy isn't the everyday staple it is for us, piled high in refrigerated aisles. Oh no, milk, cheese, butter. These are precious commodities, tinged with an almost magical quality because of their scarcity. To even have a hope of tasting them regularly, your family needs to achieve a certain level of, let's call it, peasant prosperity. And that usually means owning an animal capable of producing milk. We're not talking a sprawling dairy farm here. You're picturing a single, precious cow, or perhaps a hardy goat. If you're a bit further down the economic ladder or live in hillier terrain, imagine your family's cow. Let's call her Daisy. Because why not Daisy isn't just livestock. She's practically a family member, a vital, walking, mooing asset. She represents a significant investment, a daily responsibility, and a source of incredible potential wealth. The rhythmic tug and release as you milk her, the warm, frothy liquid streaming into your wooden pail, assuming you've got a pail that doesn't leak too badly. That's the sound of possibility. The fresh milk itself, warm from Daisy, is an immediate, almost decadent treat. You drink it quickly. Of course, there's no little carton in a chilled box. It's now, or it starts to turn. This isn't like forgetting a gallon in the back of your modern fridge until it starts to develop its own ecosystem. This is a race against nature, and nature usually wins. Caring for Daisy is a constant concern. She needs fodder, especially in the lean winter months. She needs water. She needs a reasonably safe place to shelter, even if that shelter is just a shared lean-to attached to your own humble dwelling. Her earthy scent and soft snuffles a constant backdrop to your life. She's not just a source of potential dairy, she's your four-legged, mooing confidant, listening patiently to all your whispered worries about the harvest or the reeve's latest demands. And there's a whole layer of superstition. Around milk, too. It was a common belief that witches could magically steal milk directly from a cow's udder, or curdle it with a glance. So, you'd probably have a few charms or muttered prayers to protect Daisy and her precious gift, just in case Old Mother Hemlock from the next village over gets any funny ideas. That's a quirky little tidbit for you. The fear of supernatural milk theft was a genuine concern. Now, even if you are fortunate enough to have Daisy, or perhaps a plucky goat named Billy, who probably eats everything but the Lord's prize-winning roses, one hopes accessing the means to keep them productive isn't straightforward. Those common lands we've touched upon, the shared pastures, your Lord has quite a bit of say in who gets to use them, for how long, and with how many animals. This is a mainstream historical fact, lords, through their manorial courts, often strictly regulated access to common resources like pasture land. They might stipulate that only a certain number of beasts per household can graze, or they might reserve the best grazing for their own herds. So, you might find yourself leading Daisy to some rather sparse, overgrazed patch, hoping she can find enough to keep her milk flowing. And then, there are the dues. Oh, the dues. Just as the Lord expects a portion of your grain, he might also expect a share of your dairy, perhaps a cheese rent, or a certain number of days' milk. It's another way the system keeps you tethered, a constant reminder of who's really in charge. Your small personal luxury is also, in part, his. Historians still argue whether these dairy tithes were universally applied or varied significantly based on local custom and the specific relationship between a manor and its tenants. It adds another layer of complexity to your already complex life. So, what about the products themselves? Fresh milk, as we said, is a fleeting joy. You drink it. Perhaps give some to the very young or the sick, if you can spare it. If it sours, it's not a total disaster. Soured milk or buttermilk can be used in cooking, or drunk if you have the stomach for it. It's an acquired taste. Perhaps like some of those intensely bitter craft beers people in the future will claim to enjoy purely for the experience. Waste not, want not, especially when the alternative is, well, less cheese is the real star when it comes to making milk. Last, your peasant cheese isn't going to be a delicate, oozy brie or a sharp, aged cheddar from a fancy shop. It's likely to be a simple, hard, pressed cheese made to endure. The process is laborious, heating the milk, adding rennet often from a calf's stomach, cutting the curds, pressing out the whey, salting, and then aging. Each step is crucial, and a mistake can mean a spoiled batch, a disaster for a family relying on that stored protein. The cheese might be strong, a bit tangy, maybe even a little crumbly, but it's valuable food, a concentrated source of calories and nutrients that can see you through leaner times, or even be traded for other goods if you have a surplus. A big if, and butter. Butter. Now you're entering the realm of true peasant extravagance. Churning butter is incredibly labor-intensive. You need a good amount of cream, which means you need a healthy, well-fed cow producing rich milk. And then you need the time and energy to agitate that cream until the fat globules separate. The resulting butter is a golden, energy-dense treasure. For most peasants, butter would be a rare treat indeed. Perhaps a tiny pat on a piece of bread for a festival, or used in cooking for a particularly special occasion. You're far more likely to see a generous slab of it on the Lord's table, glistening invitingly, than on your own. It's almost mythical, that much butter in one place. You'd probably think he's churning it from unicorn milk. It's that unobtainable for your daily life. The Lord, of course, probably thinks cheese is a great idea for his feasts, and butter is even better. Sorry, couldn't resist that one. So, while the idea of a creamy, dairy-rich diet is appealing, for you, it's largely a dream. Access is limited by animal ownership, which is a significant hurdle in itself, and then further constrained by the resources available for that animal and the demands of your Lord. It makes you appreciate every single drop of milk, every crumb of cheese, in a way that's hard to imagine when you can just pop to the shop for a pint. This isn't a lifestyle choice, like going dairy-free in the 21st century. This is the often stark reality of limited resources. The rare luxury of dairy is just that, rare, and all the more precious for it. Right, so, after all that talk of endless pottage and, if you're lucky, a bit of that dense, dark bread we discussed, you might be wondering where the protein is. You've seen the fields, the forests. Surely, there's meat to be had. Well, let's talk about that. For you, the medieval peasant, meat is often more of a dream, a whispered legend, than a regular feature on your rough-hewn wooden table. It's the highlight, the rare indulgence, the thing that makes a festival truly festive. It's not your Tuesday night stir-fry, that's for sure. Think about it. Owning large livestock, like cattle, is a sign of considerable wealth, far beyond your means. Those beasts are for milk, for pulling the plow, too valuable to become dinner unless they're old, injured, or it's a dire emergency. So, where does that leave you? Stomach rumbling for something more substantial than boiled beans. Your eyes might drift towards the edges of the woods, where small game flits in and out of view. A plump rabbit, a skittish hare, perhaps a pheasant rustling in the undergrowth. These are tempting. Oh, so tempting. And this is where we tiptoe into the rather risky business of poaching. You see, most of the land, and therefore most of the game, belongs to the Lord. Remember him? Yeah, the one with the castle and the knights, and the rather strict rules about, well, everything. It's a mainstream historical fact that forest laws were incredibly severe. Getting caught taking a deer or even a rabbit from the Lord's land could mean fines you could never pay, mutilation, or even death. It's like trying to sneak a snack from the fridge at 3 a.m., but the fridge is owned by a heavily armed nobleman, and the snack is his prize-winning deer. High stakes, indeed. Yet hunger is a powerful motivator, so you might, very cautiously, learn the ways of the snare, the cleverly concealed trap. You become an expert in silence, in reading the tracks, in knowing the habits of these creatures. It's a desperate gamble. If you're successful, you bring home a creature that needs to be butchered and cooked in utmost secrecy. The smell of roasting meat, so alluring, could also be your undoing if the wrong person catches a whiff. The meat itself, from a wild rabbit or bird, is lean, perhaps a little tough, but incredibly precious. It's a burst of flavor and sustenance that's almost shocking after the blandness of the daily grind. You'd savor every morsel, every tiny bone picked clean. What about something a little more domestic? If your family is doing a bit better than others, or perhaps you've inherited a couple, you might have chickens. These aren't the plump, hormone-fed birds you see in supermarkets today. These are scrawny, active creatures, scratching a living from whatever they can find. And their primary purpose for you isn't meat, it's eggs. An egg is a small and perfect package of protein, a regular, if modest, contribution to your diet. That scrawny chicken. She's not dinner. She's a walking, clucking retirement plan, one tiny egg at a time, or at least a consistent source of food. You'd only consider slaughtering a hen if she's very old and stopped laying, or if a special occasion, like a wedding or a major feast day, absolutely demands it. Even then, it's a tough decision. A rooster might be eaten a bit more readily, but you need at least one for, well, future chickens. So, poultry on the table is still a treat, not a given. Now, let's talk about the king of peasant protein, the once-a-year superstar, the pig. Many peasant families, or sometimes a small group of families together, would raise a pig. This animal is a marvel of efficiency. It eats scraps, forages, and grows fat over the months. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit is the practice of pannage, where, if permitted by the local lord, often for a fee, peasants could drive their pigs into the woods in autumn to fatten up on fallen acorns and beech nuts. This made for some seriously delicious pork. Apparently, the slaughter of the pig, usually in late autumn or early winter, is a huge event. It's a time of community effort and, importantly, community sharing. The pig provides a windfall of meat. Nothing, and I mean nothing, goes to waste. The blood is used for black pudding, the intestines for sausage casings, the fat rendered down for cooking or preserving, the head, feet, ears, everything finds a purpose. Nose-to-tail eating wasn't a trendy foodie movement. It was just Tuesday. Or, well, that one special Tuesday of the year when the pig was processed. Some meat would be eaten fresh, a glorious feast that would be talked about for weeks, but much of it would be preserved, salted, smoked, dried, to try and make it last through the lean winter months. Even then, it's carefully rationed, a sliver of bacon to flavor the pottage, a small piece of sausage as a rare treat. Historians still argue whether the average peasant's access to protein significantly improved or declined across different centuries within the medieval period, depending on factors like plague recovery and land availability. What about larger hunts, the kind you see in movies with nobles on horseback and packs of hounds? Well, those are generally for the aristocracy. You, as a peasant, might be conscripted as a beater to flesh out game for the lord and his hunting party. But the prize, the venison or boar, isn't typically for you. However, sometimes a lord might distribute a portion of a large kill to his tenants, especially on a feast day, as a show of largesse, or in some very specific communal contexts. There might be organized efforts to deal with problem animals, like wolves, where the community might share in any resulting less palatable meat. But these are exceptions, not the rule. The idea of you just heading out for a deer hunt whenever you fancy, forget it. That's a one-way ticket to the gallows, or at best, a very unpleasant encounter with the Lord's reeve. So, when you dream of food, when your stomach aches with the monotony of your diet, it's likely meat that dances in your visions. That rich, savory, satisfying taste and texture is a symbol of abundance, of celebration, of a life beyond mere survival. It's a reminder of what you don't have, and what makes those rare occasions when you do have it so incredibly special. Each bite is precious, a fleeting moment of luxury in a world that, for you, offers very few. It's a stark contrast to our modern world, where meat can be, for many, an everyday, almost unthinking choice. For you, it's a feast, a dream, a memory to hold on to. And so, you find yourself, perhaps after a long day of trying to coax something edible from that stubborn patch of earth we discussed, or maybe after a less than fruitful forage in the woods, drawn towards the murmur and glint of water, whether it's a slow, meandering river, the still, watchful surface of a lake, or the rhythmic sigh of the coast. Water whispers a promise of sustenance different from the land. It's a cool hand on a fevered brow, this liquid expanse, and it holds life. Tiny, flitting, swimming life that might just end up in your belly. You settle down by the water's edge, the damp earth seeping a gentle coolness through your worn clothes. The air here feels different, heavier with moisture, carrying the scent of mud, wet stones, and the faint, almost imperceptible aroma of fish themselves. Your fishing gear, well, it's not exactly something you'd find in a modern sporting goods store. There's no graphite rod, no reel with a silky smooth drag. Your high-tech fishing rod is often just a pliable sapling, cut and trimmed. Or perhaps you don't even bother with that. For simple line fishing, you might have a length of cord you've painstakingly twisted from plant fibers, nettles, perhaps, or even horsehair if you've been particularly fortunate or resourceful. The hook is a marvel of miniaturized desperation, a sharpened piece of bone, a thorn carefully selected for its curve and strength. Or if things are looking up in the world, a tiny, precious sliver of metal, laboriously shaped, bait. Remember those worms you might have dug up while tending your meager garden plot, or the grubs found under a rotting log. They're now destined for a higher, or at least wetter purpose. You impale one onto your primitive hook, feeling its soft body squirm, and cast your line with a gentle flick of the wrist. There's no satisfying zing of monofilament, just the soft plop as your hook and bait sink beneath the surface. And then you wait. Patience is more than a virtue here. It's a fundamental survival skill. You watch the line, or perhaps a small float made of reed or wood, for the slightest tremor, the almost imperceptible dip that signals interest from below. Sometimes, for hours, nothing. The water merely reflects the sky, indifferent to your hunger. But then, a twitch, a little tug. Your heart gives a small, hopeful flutter. You give a gentle pull. And if you're lucky, you feel a slight resistance. You draw in your line, hand over hand, revealing not a magnificent, thrashing beast, but more often than not, a small silvery fish, perhaps no bigger than your finger, a dace, a roach, a gudgeon, names that don't exactly scream gourmet feast. These are the common currency of the peasant's aquatic larder small, often incredibly bony, but undeniably protein. Each one is a tiny victory against starvation. If you live near a coast, your opportunities expand slightly. At low tide, you might scramble over slippery rocks, prying off mussels and limpets, or gathering edible seaweed. Perhaps you fashion a small net to scoop up shrimp or tiny crabs from rock pools. The taste of the sea is strong in these, a briny tang that's a world away from the sometimes muddy flavor of freshwater catches. Netting, even on a small scale, can be more productive than a single line. You might have woven a small hand net from similar plant fibers as your line, using it to scoop fish from shallower waters or reedy areas where they congregate. Or if your community is well organized, you might participate in using a larger seine net, dragged through a section of river or a lake cove. This requires cooperation, a shared effort for a shared, though still modest, reward. Then there are fish traps or weirs, more permanent structures. These can be intricate constructions of woven willow branches or strategically placed stones, designed to funnel fish into an area where they can be easily caught. Some of these weirs, particularly those built for larger rivers or estuaries, were surprisingly sophisticated feats of engineering. Monasteries, in particular, became quite adept at aquaculture, often maintaining elaborate stew ponds, carefully stocked to ensure a reliable supply of fish. They knew that a steady food source, even a slippery one, was a blessing, especially considering how vital fish became during Lent and on other meatless days mandated by the Church. A mainstream historical fact that profoundly shaped fishing practices and fish consumption across medieval Europe. You, however, probably don't have a meticulously managed monastic stew pond. You have the wild, unpredictable water. The construction and use of larger weirs, though, wasn't without its issues. Historians still argue whether the widespread construction of mill dams and fish weirs significantly impacted migratory fish populations to the detriment of peasant diets in some areas, or if the localized abundance they sometimes created for those with rights to use them offset this more widespread ecological change. For you, a simple peasant, access to such a weir might be restricted, belonging to the local lord or a wealthier landholder. Your traps are likely to be smaller, simpler, tucked away in a quiet bend of the river, hoping to ensnare a passing eel, a prized catch for its fatty richness, or a few more of those ubiquitous small fish. Sometimes, if the water is clear and shallow enough, you might even try spearing. A sharpened stick, its point hardened in the fire, becomes your weapon. This is a more active, almost predatory form of fishing. You stand motionless, your shadow falling away from the water, eyes scanning for the dark dart of a fish against the lighter riverbed. It requires a quick eye and an even quicker thrust. The splash, the hopeful retrieval. It's a more visceral connection to your prey. And what of the catch itself? Let's be honest, it's rarely a banquet. You gather your haul, a handful of little fish, perhaps back at your hut. Preparation is simple. They're gutted with a sharp stone or a precious knife, maybe scaled if they're large enough to bother, though often they're cooked scales and all. Thrown onto the embers of your fire, they sizzle and char, the smell of wood smoke and cooking fish filling your small dwelling. Or perhaps they're tossed into the pot with whatever other foraged greens or meager grains you have, making a thin and bony soup. Eating them is an art in itself. The main sporting challenge isn't the fight the fish puts up, but trying to get more than a mouthful of flesh without swallowing a bone the size of your pinky nail. Each tiny morsel of flesh is carefully separated, a small, savory reward for your efforts. It's not much, but it's something. It's the taste of the river, the lake, the sea. A reminder that even in the hardest times, the waters can offer a little something to keep you going. And if you're truly, exceptionally lucky, you might even catch enough for a second. Equally tiny fish, the abundance, as you can imagine, is sometimes just overwhelming. But still, it's food. And in a world where food is a constant concern, that slippery, bony offering from the water is a gift you gratefully accept. You find that even with your carefully tended garden plot and the grain from the Lord's fields, your meals, like that pottage we've mentioned, can feel a bit, well, samey, and sometimes just not quite enough. So, you step away from the smoky interior of your cottage, perhaps with a woven basket slung over your arm, and head towards the woods, the hedgerows, or the uncultivated edges of fields. It's time to supplement the pantry, medieval style. This isn't your primary food source. Mind you, that's still the hard-won grain and whatever your small animals provide. But foraging is where a little bit of wild magic and a whole lot of knowledge can transform a meal from mere sustenance into something approaching, dare we say, interesting. The forest floor is cool beneath your worn leather shoes, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Your eyes, sharpened by necessity, scan the undergrowth. Berries are a prime target, especially in late summer and early autumn. You might find wild strawberries, tiny jewels of intense sweetness, hiding low amongst their leaves, a far cry from the behemoths we see in supermarkets today. But oh, the flavor! Then there are raspberries, tangier, clinging to their thorny canes, and blackberries, staining your fingers a deep purple as you pluck them. You learn quickly which ones are juicy and ripe, and which ones will give you a stomachache. Or worse, it's a bit like a medieval lucky dip, only the prizes are edible, and the booby traps significantly less fun. Every so often, you might even come across bilberries, those smaller, more intensely flavored cousins of the blueberry. A real treat to sweeten a bland porridge or to be eaten by the handful. A burst of tartness on your tongue. Nuts are another crucial find, especially for bulking up winter stores. Hazelnuts, or cob nuts as you might call them, are gathered in their green, leafy husks, then dried carefully by the hearth, their shells turning a rich brown. Walnuts. If you're lucky enough to live near a walnut tree, perhaps one growing wild, or on common land, are a richer prize. Their shells harder to crack, but the meat inside so satisfyingly oily and nutritious. Beech nuts, tiny triangular morsels, can be gathered in vast quantities in a good mast year, though they are fiddly to process. And acorns, too, are surprisingly useful, though they require a lot more work. You can't just pop them in your mouth like a squirrel. They need to be leached of their bitter tannins, often by soaking them in running water for days, or boiling them multiple times, changing the water each time until it runs clear. It's a faff, as we'd say now, a real labor of love, or perhaps desperation. But when food is scarce, every calorie counts, even the ones that make you work exceptionally hard for them. Some people would even grind these leached acorns into a coarse flour to extend their precious grain supplies, adding a slightly nutty, earthy flavor to their bread or pottage. Now, let's talk about mushrooms. Ah, mushrooms. The rock stars and the Russian roulette of the foraging world. You approach these with a mixture of hope and extreme caution, your heart thumping a little faster. Your grandmother, or perhaps an older woman in the village known for her knowledge of herbs and simples, would have drilled into you the differences between the delicious, meaty ceps, or field mushrooms, and their deadly doppelgangers. There's no app to swipe for identification here, no handy guidebook with glossy photos and helpful user reviews. It's all memory, subtle visual cues, smells, the earthy scent of a good edible versus the slightly off, chemical whiff of a bad one, and sometimes even the environment they're growing in, the type of trees they associate with. You learn to spot the fly agaric, with its fairy tale red cap and white spots. Beautiful, but a definite no-go unless you're preparing it for some very specific and generally ill-advised purposes. You learn that a little nibble to test is generally a terrible, terrible idea. One wrong mushroom, and your pottage isn't just unappetizing, it's potentially your last meal. That's a joke. Mostly. Still, the reward of a basketful of safe, earthy fungi, like shaggy ink caps gathered young, before they deliquesce into black goo, or field mushrooms with their pink to brown gills, ready to be stewed or perhaps dried carefully on strings near the fire for later, is immense. They add such a savory depth, that umami kick we talk about today, to otherwise bland fare. Herbs and wild greens are perhaps the most common, everyday additions, the unsung heroes of the forager's basket. Along the verges, in the meadows, and even peeking through your less than perfectly weeded garden, you'd find a surprising array of edible leaves. Dandelion greens, for instance, are a bit bitter, especially as they get older, but picked young in the spring, they are packed with vitamins, not just a weed to be cursed by modern lawn enthusiasts. Nettles, carefully gathered with protected hands, thick gloves if you have them, or a very quick snatch and grab technique, followed by much blowing on stinging fingers, lose their sting when cooked and make a nutritious, iron-rich addition to soups and stews, a bit like spinach, but with a more robust, earthy flavor. Wild garlic, or ramsons, offers a pungent burst of flavor in the spring, its broad leaves and star-like white flowers carpeting woodland floors. A welcome change after a winter of preserved, often salty foods. Chickweed, a delicate little plant, can be eaten raw in a sort of wild salad. Sorrel, with its distinctly sharp, lemony tang, is wonderful for perking up a dull dish, or even just chewed on its own for a refreshing zing. Plantain, the leafy kind, not the banana relative with its prominent ribs, has young leaves that are edible when tender. All these, and many more. Fat hen, good King Henry, ground elder if you can beat it back in your garden. You might as well eat it. Find their way into your basket. These aren't just for flavor. Many of these plants also have medicinal properties, recognized through generations of trial and error. A little wild thyme for a cough, perhaps, or yarrow to help staunch bleeding from a minor cut. Your local hedgerow is basically a free, open-air pharmacy and greengrocer combined, provided you know what you're looking for. And that knowledge, that's the absolute key. It's not something you pick up in an afternoon workshop with a charmingly rustic instructor. It's a lifetime of learning, an encyclopedia carried in your head, passed down from parent to child, from elder to younger, often through observation and direct instruction out in the fields and woods. You learn the rhythm of the seasons, when the berries ripen, when the nuts fall, when specific mushrooms emerge after the first autumn rains. You learn the specific places to look, that sunny bank where wild strawberries thrive, the shady spot under the oaks where the best fungi grow, the damp patch by the stream where watercress might be found. This intimate local knowledge is a treasure beyond price. It's a common misconception that all land was just open for anyone to wander and take. While there had common lands, incredibly important areas where peasants had traditional rights to graze animals, gather firewood, and yes, forage for food. Going onto the Lord's private hunting grounds or into his specially managed woodlands to gather things like choice timber or large quantities of nuts could get you into serious trouble. Poaching game was a huge offense, of course, but even taking certain valuable plants or too much wood could lead to fines or a stint in the stocks. There's a fascinating little tidbit about pisky-led paths, particularly common in folklore from the West Country of England. If you got lost in the woods while foraging, especially if you were gathering certain types of berries, or perhaps chasing an elusive mushroom, some folklore suggested you'd been led astray by piskies or fairies, mischievous nature spirits. The most common cure? To turn your coat, your apron, or another garment inside out to break the enchantment and find your way again. Practical. Probably not directly, but it speaks to the slight air of mystery and the very real dangers of getting disoriented in dense, unfamiliar woodland, especially as dusk began to fall. It's a gentle reminder that the forest is both a bountiful provider and a place demanding profound respect and careful attention. The sheer amount of practical botanical knowledge held by an average peasant would astound most of us today, who rely on supermarkets where everything is conveniently labeled and hopefully not poisonous. They were, in essence, highly skilled ecologists of their own local environment, able to read the land in ways we've largely forgotten. Historians still argue whether the increasing enclosure of common lands throughout the later medieval and early modern periods had a more devastating immediate impact on peasant diets through lost grazing rights for their few animals, or through the diminished access to these vital foraged foods, firewood, and other raw materials. It's a complex question, as both were so intertwined in their everyday survival and economic well-being. The loss of either would have been a significant blow. So, as you head back towards the village, your basket a little heavier, perhaps with a few earthy mushrooms nestled amongst damp leaves, a handful of sharp, jewel-toned berries, some fresh, vibrant greens, and a pocketful of nuts for cracking by the fire. You feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. It's not a feast fit for the Lord's table, not by a long shot, but it's yours, gathered with your own hands and your own hard-won knowledge. These wild additions will bring new textures, new flavors, and crucial nutrients to your family's meals. And maybe, just maybe, it makes that endless pottage a little more bearable for another day. It's a bit like us adding a sprinkle of foraged elderflower to a cocktail or some wild garlic pesto to pasta today for that artisanal touch. Except for you, it's not a hobby, it's not a trend, it's just Tuesday's dinner, made a little bit better by the wild bounty around you. Right then, after a long day, perhaps toiling in the fields we pictured earlier, or maybe you've been busy with some of that intricate craft work, you're likely feeling a bit parched. That medieval air, still carrying the lingering scent of, shall we say, yesterday's communal activities. From the street below, remember that charming medieval potpourri we discussed, with its delightful notes of everything, can really dry out the throat. So, what do you reach for? A cool, crisp glass of water. Oh, you sweet, optimistic soul. Not so fast, my friend. You see, water in your time, your lovely, rustic medieval existence is a bit of a gamble. Think of it as a mystery beverage. Every single time you dip your cup, will it be refreshing and life-giving, or will it be an express ticket to a very unhappy few days, with your chamber pot becoming your most intimate confidant? The local river, bless its hard-working heart, often doubles as the town's, well, let's just say it's a multi-purpose waterway, a veritable hub of commerce and, contributions. And flushing isn't really a feature yet, unless you count the occasional downpour that rearranges the debris. Wells can be better sometimes, but contamination is a tricky, invisible fiend you don't even have a name for, let alone a fancy filter to combat it. So, while you could take your chances, most sensible adults, and even many children, turn to something far more reliable, something that's been part of your daily life since, well, since you can remember ale. Yes, ale. Your trusty, slightly cloudy, and hopefully not too sour ale. It's your morning pick-me-up, your lunchtime refreshment, your evening wind-down companion as the light fades. It's the medieval equivalent of that ubiquitous water bottle we all carry today. Only, you know, it's got a bit more character, a bit more oomph, and crucially, it's generally much safer to drink. Why, you ask? With wide, innocent eyes. Because of the rather wonderful, almost alchemical magic of brewing. Now, you're not necessarily trotting down to a gleaming supermarket aisle filled with artfully labeled craft IPAs and seasonal specials. Oh no. More often than not, the ale you're drinking, the ale that forms the very bedrock of your liquid intake, is brewed right there in your own home, or perhaps by a neighbor, the local alewife. This is a domestic skill, a craft often handled by the women of the household, the brewsters. Think of it as the original sourdough starter craze, but with a much happier ending for adults, and significantly less pressure to post perfectly lit photos of your fermentation process. The process itself is wonderfully earthy, deeply connected to the land and the seasons. You'd start with grains. Barley is a common favorite, but oats or wheat might be used too, depending on what's available and affordable in your little corner of the world. These grains are malted, which means they're encouraged to sprout a little, just a tease of life, and then carefully dried, perhaps in a makeshift kiln, or even sun-dried if the weather gods are smiling. This develops the crucial sugars needed for fermentation. You can almost smell that sweet, slightly toasty, nutty aroma of the malted grain as it's being prepared. can't you? It's a scent that means comfort and sustenance. Then comes the mashing, the malted grain, perhaps roughly crushed between stones, is mixed with hot water. And here's a key, life-preserving step. The water is heated, often brought to a rolling boil, which, even if you don't understand germ theory or the existence of tiny malevolent microbes, does a pretty good job of killing off a lot of the nasty little things that might be swimming in it. Things that could otherwise turn your insides into a churning rebellion. This hot mash steeps like a giant, grainy tea, allowing enzymes to convert starches into fermentable sugars. You'd be doing this in a big cauldron hanging over the hearth fire, the air filling with a warm, slightly sweet, oaty steam that mingles with the wood smoke. You can picture it, can't you? The fire crackling and spitting, the gentle bubbling from the cauldron, the rhythmic, almost hypnotic stir of a large wooden paddle. It's quite a comforting, almost meditative process, really. A slow transformation. After mashing, the liquid, now called seawater, a wonderfully old-fashioned word, is drained off, and then it's boiled again, often with a collection of herbs and spices known as groot. Hops, which we modern folk associate so strongly with beer and all its bitter complexities, aren't universally used yet in many places. Their widespread adoption as a preservative and flavoring agent comes a bit later, though they are certainly known and starting to make an appearance, particularly in some regions. Gruit, however, is your current flavor palette. It could include things like bog myrtle for its resinous notes, yarrow for a subtle bitterness, or heather for a floral touch. Each alewife might have her own secret recipe, her own signature blend passed down through generations. This boiling not only sterilizes the wort further, but also extracts the flavors and perhaps some preservative qualities from the gruit. Then it cools. This might involve simply leaving the cauldron out, or perhaps transferring the wort to shallower wooden vessels to expedite the process. And once it's at the right temperature, not too hot, not too cold, the real magic happens: fermentation. Wild yeasts are all around you, invisible passengers on the air, on the surface of the wooden brewing vessels. Or a family might jealously guard and keep a bit of the frothy krausen from a previous successful batch, much like a sourdough starter. To kickstart the process, the wort is left in wooden tuns or barrels, and over a few days, those tiny invisible yeasts get to work, feasting on the sugars and, as a delightful byproduct, producing alcohol and carbonation. It's a living thing. This brew gurgling and sighing as it transforms plain grain water into something much more interesting. The whole affair isn't exactly a sterile laboratory procedure by 21st century standards. You're working with wooden tools, open vessels, and the ambient medieval air, which, as we've established, is full of character. But the boiling, that's your saving grace. It's a mainstream historical fact that the boiling inherent in the brewing process made ale a far safer alternative to potentially contaminated water sources for centuries. A true public health measure before public health was even a concept. If you're not brewing at home, perhaps because you lack the space, the inclination, or the knack, there's likely a local brewster, an alewife, who supplies the neighborhood. You might see her ale stake, a pole, often with a fresh green bush or a garland tied to the end, displayed prominently outside her door. This was a quirky, lesser-known tidbit. For you, it was the medieval equivalent of an ad opus sign, specifically signaling, fresh batch ready, come and get it before it's gone. Sort of like a hot donuts now sign. But for something a bit more fundamentally important to daily life, monasteries, too, were renowned for their brewing prowess. They often had the land for growing high-quality barley, the resources for larger-scale operations, and the scholarly dedication to refine their techniques, often producing very high quality and consistent ales, some of which were even traded over distances. But what about its goodness for you, beyond just being safer than water? Compared to that risky, unpredictable water, ale is a nutritional step up. Believe it or not, it's not just about avoiding illness or the gentle buzz. This isn't just your social lubricant for the village gathering. It's practically liquid bread. It provides calories, which you definitely need. Given your active, physically demanding lifestyle, no sitting at a desk, scrolling through social media for 8 hours for most of you. It contains B vitamins from the yeast, which are vital for energy metabolism and overall well-being. Even the small ale, a weaker brew with lower alcohol content, offered hydration and some nutritional benefit, making it suitable for laborers throughout the day, and sometimes even for older children, especially during times when water was particularly suspect. Water gives you hydration. Sure, but if it's bad water, it takes much more than it gives. Ale gives hydration plus calories, plus a bang, some vitamins, minus. Hopefully the dysentery and other waterborne woes. It's like your grandma always said, an ale a day keeps well, it mostly keeps you from drinking dodgy water, and that's quite enough. Thank you. She was a wise woman, your medieval grandma, pragmatic to the core. Of course, the strength would vary wildly. Your daily table ale, the stuff you drink with every meal, wouldn't be the potent, specially brewed stuff reserved for feasts, weddings, and major celebrations. But even a relatively low alcohol ale was providing something more than just a means to quench thirst or achieve mild cheer. Indeed, historians still argue whether the consistent consumption of low alcohol ale by much of the population contributed to a generally less productive workforce due to mild, constant inebriation and a sort of societal grogginess, or if it simply provided necessary sustenance, calories, and safe hydration in a world where other options were far more perilous and often scarce. It's a fascinating debate. Thinking about the sheer volume of ale consumed, it wasn't just a drink, it was a fundamental part of the diet, a cornerstone of daily life, as essential as the bread we talked about making in our imaginations earlier. So, as you lift your wooden tankard, or perhaps a sturdy leather jack, take a slow, appreciative sip. That's slightly sweet, sometimes slightly bitter. Always Earthy brew is more than just a drink. It's your fuel, your hydration, and your small daily rebellion against the tyranny of questionable water. Cheers to that, indeed. And so, after all that meticulous planning of the fields, all the communal effort we touched upon, you find that life isn't just one long, monotonous stretch of tilling and reaping. Oh no, it's a far more dramatic, cyclical dance, dictated entirely by the sun, the rain, and the often fickle moods of Mother Nature herself. You're about to experience the true rhythm of the seasons, specifically as it plays out on your plate, or more often, in your humble wooden bowl. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer unadulterated relief of late summer and early autumn. The harvest is in. You can almost smell it now. Can't you? The air is thick with the scent of newly threshed wheat, a dusty golden perfume that promises bread, real bread, for weeks to come. The sun, though starting to dip a little lower each day, still bathes the stubble fields in a warm, amber light. You walk through the village, and there's a different energy, a lightness that wasn't there during the backbreaking labor of the past months. Barns and storage huts, those precious little structures we talked about, are, for a fleeting period, satisfyingly full, or at least fuller than they will be. You see vibrant colors that will soon fade from your diet. Perhaps some late apples, crisp and sweet, a rare treat you savor, letting the juice run down your chin. Maybe some plump beans, freshly picked, or even a few hardy root vegetables pulled from your small garden plot. Remember those little patches of hope we discussed? They're yielding their final treasures now. If the Lord was feeling generous, or if a pig simply met an unfortunate yet timely end, there might even be a bit of fresh meat, a luxury so profound it feels almost sinful after months of, well, mostly pottage. You can hear the crackle of fires a little more readily, the scent of something other than boiling grains occasionally gracing the evening air. It's a time of communal meals that feels slightly less like a grim necessity and more like a muted celebration. You might even find yourself with a slightly rounder belly, a temporary buffer against the lean times you know, with a deep ancestral certainty are just around the corner. This is the medieval equivalent of having a fully stocked pantry and freezer after a massive shopping trip. Except your shopping trip involved a scythe and the potential for starvation if it went poorly. But, as you know, all good things must come to an end. The days shorten with an almost cruel rapidity. You feel the chill creeping in, first in the mornings, then lingering throughout the day. The vibrant colors of autumn leach away, replaced by the muted browns and grays of approaching winter. That comforting smell of fresh grain slowly fades from the communal air, replaced by the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. The stores, once appearing so bountiful, begin to shrink. Each scoop of flour, each handful of dried peas, is now measured with a more careful eye. It's a slow, creeping realization, a tightening in your chest that mirrors the tightening grip of the cold. The laughter in the village becomes a little more subdued. The fires are built higher, not just for warmth, but as a small defiance against the encroaching darkness. Then, winter descends in earnest, and with it, the true test of your forethought, your luck, and your community's resilience. The world outside your small, smoky hut is often a landscape of white and gray, beautiful perhaps from a distance, but for you, it's a barrier. The fields are frozen, the forest quiet and often dangerous. Your world shrinks to the hearth, the storage chest, and the well-trodden, icy path to your neighbor's door, if you dare venture out. Now, your diet transforms into something, let's call it creatively minimalist. You rely almost entirely on what was preserved, that sack of wheat or rye. It's your lifeline, ground into coarse flour for dark, dense bread that becomes staler and harder with each passing week. Sometimes, it's so hard you have to soak it in water or thin ale just to make it chewable. You might have dried peas or beans, which you'll boil endlessly into that familiar monotonous pottage we've discussed so often, perhaps flavored with a sliver of hoarded onion, if you're lucky. It's the kind of meal that fills the belly but rarely satisfies the soul. Meat, if you have any, is salted or smoked. You can taste the aggressive saltiness now, can't you? It stings the tongue, a harsh reminder of its preservative power. A bit of salted pork, boiled to tenderness, or perhaps some dried fish, equally salty, flakes into your pottage, lending a savory depth that is both welcome and a constant reminder of summer's bounty. Now, long gone. A mainstream historical fact for you, salt was the critical ingredient for preserving meat and fish, an absolute cornerstone of winter survival for centuries, far more valuable than many spices. Without effective salting, widespread animal husbandry through the winter would have been nearly impossible for peasant communities. Vegetables are a distant memory, unless you were fortunate enough to have a root cellar, or perhaps some pickled cabbage. Its sharp, tangy bite a welcome, if aggressive, change from the blandness. Cheese. If you had the milk and the means to make it, most would be aged and hard, something to be nibbled on sparingly. You can almost feel the dry, crumbly texture in your mouth. Your meals are repetitive, a litany of gruel, dark bread, and perhaps, if you're fortunate, something salty. It's like being subscribed to a meal delivery service that only sends you variations of oatmeal and beef jerky. Forever. And sometimes, things went wrong with those stored grains. Here's a quirky and rather grim tidbit if rye, a common peasant crop, was stored in damp conditions. It could become infected with a fungus called ergot. Eating this contaminated rye could lead to a dreadful condition called ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire, causing hallucinations, gangrene, and excruciating pain. Imagine, in the depths of winter's misery, your very bread turning against you. It certainly puts your worries about slightly stale supermarket loaves into perspective, doesn't it? The deep winter months are a slow grind, but then comes early spring, a period that sounds hopeful, but was often the cruelest. This was the hungry gap. Your carefully hoarded winter stores are now at their absolute lowest, perhaps even gone. The preserved meats are eaten. The last of the grain is being scraped from the bottom of the bin. The new crops are sown. Yes, but they are weeks, even months, away from yielding anything. You feel a gnawing emptiness in your stomach that mirrors the bareness of the fields. This is when you truly understand desperation. You might venture into the woods, not for firewood this time, but for anything edible. Early spring greens, bitter and tough, become a feast. Nettles, carefully boiled to remove their sting. Wild garlic, if you can find it. Anything to supplement the meager, dwindling rations. Children, gaunt and pale, are sent to forage. The promise of warmth is in the air. The days are lengthening, but your body is crying out for sustenance. Historians still argue whether the profound and recurrent nutritional deficiencies experienced during this hungry gap were a direct catalyst for peasant revolts and social unrest, or if they were merely one strand in a complex web of grievances alongside taxation and land rights. It's a stark reminder that hunger has always been a powerful historical force. You look out at the newly greening world with a mixture of hope and profound weariness. The cycle is beginning again. The promise of abundance is on the distant horizon, but you have to survive now. Every bird's egg found, every fish caught in the reawakening rivers is a tiny victory against the fading shadow of winter starvation. It's a period where what's for dinner isn't just a question. It's a profound existential challenge answered with whatever scraps nature, or sheer luck, might provide. You dream of the harvest, of that brief and glorious window of plenty, knowing you must endure this gauntlet one more time to reach it. And so, the rhythm continues, a relentless turning of the seasons, each bringing its own distinct flavor of survival. The harvest is in, a glorious pile of potential, but your work, oh, it's far from over. You can't just admire that mountain of grain or those baskets brimming with late-season vegetables, not unless you have a particular fondness for watching your hard-won sustenance transform into a fuzzy, inedible science experiment come midwinter. No. Now comes the equally crucial, and perhaps even more meticulous, task of preservation. It's this ingenuity, this foresight, that truly separates a fleeting season of plenty from the grim reality of a long, hungry winter. You know, that winter we keep mentioning. The one you probably won't survive without these next steps. Your first and perhaps most trusted ally in this fight against decay is salt. You see those rough, heavy sacks filled with coarse, grayish crystals. This isn't your delicate blush pink finishing salt from a boutique shop. This is robust, unrefined, and incredibly powerful. You might have traded precious goods for it, or it might have been painstakingly harvested from coastal salt pans, evaporated slowly under the sun, or even mined from the earth. One mainstream historical fact to whisper into your ear is that salt was so incredibly valuable throughout much of history, It was often used as currency. The word salary itself derives from sal, the Latin word for salt. Imagine getting paid in a pile of seasoning, though, given its importance, perhaps not so strange after all. You take a freshly caught fish, gleaming and silver, already gutted and cleaned by the water's edge. Now, with a practiced hand, you rub that coarse salt deep into its flesh, into every crevice, along the backbone, under the gills if the head is still on. The crystals feel rough against your skin, almost abrasive, and you can practically feel them starting their work. The salt is a desiccant, a powerful agent of dehydration. It begins to draw out the moisture from the fish's cells, creating an environment where the bacteria and molds that cause spoilage simply can't thrive. It's like evicting uninvited microscopic house guests by slowly draining their swimming pool. You do this with cut after cut of meat too, perhaps thick slabs of pork belly, destined to become something akin to bacon, or larger joints of venison from a successful hunt. These are packed tightly into wooden barrels, layered generously with more of that precious salt, each layer tamping down the one below, ensuring complete contact. It's a briny entombment, a promise of savory meals when fresh meat is but a distant memory. Then there's drying, an art form perfected by sun and wind, and a good deal of patience. Remember those grains we threshed with such rhythmic effort, separating wheat from chaff? They now need to be utterly, completely dry before they can be stored in those clay-lined pits or granaries we talked about. You see vast quantities of wheat, barley, or perhaps rye, spread thinly on woven mats or clean sun-baked earth. Attendants, often younger members of the community, or those with a bit more patience than brute strength, gently turn the grains with wooden rakes or even their bare hands, ensuring every single kernel feels the warmth of the sun and the caress of the dry air. If you left your grains even slightly damp, you'd be cultivating a fine crop of mold, which, while arguably organic, isn't exactly the superfood your ancestors were aiming for. It's a slow, watchful process, often taking days, always with an eye on the sky for any hint of rain. Vegetables, too, succumb to this gentle desiccation. You see long decorative strings of sliced apples, their edges slowly curling and browning, hung from the rafters of a warm, airy attic or a specially built drying shed. Mushrooms, foraged from the forest floor, are threaded onto twine like earthy beads. Bunches of herbs, thyme, rosemary, sage, hang upside down, their volatile oils concentrating, their aromas growing more intense, more pungent with each passing day. You can almost smell the future stews and remedies steeping in the air. Even legumes, like beans and peas, are left to dry completely in their pods, either on the vine or spread out after harvesting, until they rattle like tiny maracas, ready to be shelled and stored in cool, dark, dry places. These aren't your freeze-dried camping meals, but the principle is ancient and effective. And the fish, those salted creatures, many of them continue their journey towards longevity by being hung on large wooden racks, often near the coast, or in a particularly breezy spot. Split open, they flap gently in the wind, the sun beating down, further wicking away moisture. You can see rows upon rows of them, silvery skins glinting, transforming into something tough, almost wood-like. This is the ancestor of things like bacalao or stockfish, which could last for an astonishingly long time, providing vital protein for long voyages or harsh winters. It's a testament to making the most of a glut, ensuring that nothing goes to waste. Finally, you might venture towards the subtle alchemy of smoking. Perhaps there's a small, windowless hut set a little apart from the main dwellings, a plume of fragrant smoke curling lazily from a vent in its roof. This is the smokehouse. You push open the heavy wooden door, and the air inside is thick, almost tangible. rich with the acrid sweet perfume of smoldering hardwood, oak, alder, hickory, perhaps even fruit woods like apple or cherry. Each imparts its own unique character. Never pine, though? That would make everything taste like a poorly chosen air freshener. Inside, hanging from hooks or laid out on racks in the cool Tmur's smoky gloom, are sides of fish, hams, sausages, or even cheeses, if your people are so inclined. The fire is kept low, a smoldering, sulking heat, producing copious amounts of smoke but not too much direct warmth, especially for cold smoking. The meat or fish, often having been salted or brined beforehand, slowly absorbs the phenolic compounds from the smoke. These compounds are clever little things. They not only imbue the food with that delicious, complex, smoky flavor we still crave today, but they also act as powerful antimicrobials and antioxidants, fighting off spoilage and rancidity. It's a slow, patient baptism by smoke. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. While today we carefully select our smoking woods, some ancient peoples were not above using dried animal dung as a fuel source for smoking, which would have imparted, well, let's just say, unique, novel regional flavors. It's like the original barbecue, but with less bottled sauce and perhaps a more urgent, existential motivation. The development of these methods, salting, drying, smoking, wasn't accidental, though happy accidents probably played their part. It was a driven innovation. However, historians still argue whether the primary impetus for the refinement of these complex food preservation techniques was solely the grim necessity of survival through lean times, or if an emerging preference for the distinct and often intense flavors produced by these methods also played a significant evolving role in their widespread adoption and perfection. Did they preserve because they had to? Or did they also start to enjoy the tangy bite of salt-cured ham, the concentrated sweetness of a dried fig, or the deep savor of smoked salmon, seeking those flavors out? Perhaps, as with many things, it was a bit of both, a dance between need and nascent culinary artistry. You watch these processes, the careful, almost reverent handling of food, and you understand this isn't just about staving off hunger. This is about ensuring the continuity of your family, your community, through the dark, cold, and hungry belly of winter. Right, you've been soldiering through with that, shall we say. Character building sat, bread we talked about, the kind that gives your jaw a real workout, and that endless, monotonous pottage. Remember its subtle variations on the theme of things boiled in water. Just when your palate has basically thrown in the towel and started looking for other career options, a different sort of buzz begins to fill the air. It's not the usual hum of daily toil. It's the distinct, hopeful murmur heralding a feast day. Suddenly, the gray tones of your everyday existence acquire a splash of vibrant color. These occasions are the medieval equivalent of finding a $20 bill in an old coat pocket. Only instead of cash, it's the promise of something other than gruel. Think of your most cherished holiday meal. Then imagine you've been eating unseasoned oatmeal for every other meal of the year. That's the level of anticipation we're talking about. Feast days and festivals are precious, glittering islands in a vast ocean of dietary sameness. They are the exclamation points in a long, rambling narrative of boiled grains. The most immediate and celebrated upgrade often comes in the form of bread, that dense, dark, slightly challenging loaf that's become your constant, if somewhat unloved, companion might actually undergo a transformation. You could find yourself looking at, and more importantly, tasting bread made from flour that's been sifted with a bit more care. It's noticeably whiter, blessedly lighter. It doesn't feel like you're wrestling with a small, baked brick. Sometimes, if the stars have truly aligned and the hens are feeling generous, it might even be enriched with an egg. or a drizzle of precious honey. Assuming the local lord hasn't earmarked the entire beehive's output for his own, doubtlessly refined palate. Holding a slice of this superior bread, you feel a sense of quiet triumph. It's the medieval artisan loaf, a fleeting taste of the good life. And then there's the aroma that truly electrifies the senses, a scent so rare it feels almost legendary for most roasting meat. Yes, you heard that right. Actual, honest-to-goodness meat. Not just the memory of bacon grease flavoring the perpetual pot of greens, or a bone simmered into oblivion for a hint of savor. This could be pork, if a pig has met its glorious destiny for the celebration. Perhaps some mutton, or if you're extraordinarily lucky, some form of poultry, a rather lean chicken, a duck, or even a majestic goose. If it's a major event like Christmas or Easter, you might see it turning slowly on a spit, if you're positioned well, the fat rendering and sizzling, creating a perfume so intoxicating it could probably convince a vegetarian to reconsider their life choices, at least for a day. You receive your portion, small and treasured. It's not a kingly feast. No overflowing platters like you might imagine from tapestries. Think more of a chef's special tasting morsel. But when your usual protein source is the occasional bean that bravely navigates its way through the pottage, this is a banquet. Each chew is deliberate, a conscious act of savoring. Each fiber a reminder that life, very occasionally, can offer flavors beyond earthy and slightly burnt. The sheer act of consuming meat feels like a luxurious rebellion against the everyday, a temporary elevation, even if it's just for this one glorious meal. Beyond these star attractions of better bread and the near-mythical appearance of meat, other special dishes make their debut. You might encounter pies, and not just the standard vegetable and mystery scrap variety. These could be filled with fruit, if the season and the orchards have been kind, perhaps sweetened with a touch of honey, or if the trade routes are open and fortune smiles, a tiny dash of incredibly expensive sugar. Imagine a small tart, its crust flakier and richer than usual, perhaps benefiting from a smidgen of butter or lard you haven't seen for an age. The sweetness is a revelation, a shocking, delightful contrast to the usually savory, sometimes bitter chabur notes of your daily intake. It's like discovering a primary color after a lifetime of sepia tones. Sometimes, special stews appear, deeper and more complex than your daily pottage. These might boast a wider array of vegetables, some carefully foraged wild mushrooms, the edible varieties. One fervently hopes. Fungal foraging was always a bit of a high-stakes game, and if the heavens are truly smiling upon you, discernible pieces of meat actually floating within, not just hinted at by a hopeful imagination. Spices, those fantastically valuable treasures we touched upon earlier, might make a brief, tantalizing appearance. A whisper of ginger, a hint of pepper, or even a faint sigh of cinnamon could elevate a simple dish from mere sustenance to something approaching ambrosia. You breathe it in deeply, trying to etch the aroma, the taste, into your memory, knowing it will need to sustain you, in spirit at least, for a good while. It's a mainstream historical fact that the medieval calendar was absolutely packed with saints' days and various religious festivals. These weren't all massive blowouts. Of course, for the average person, many would have involved little more than an extra church service. However, some key dates, the major Christian holidays like Easter and Christmas, or the feast day of a local patron saint, would indeed be the catalyst for these welcome culinary improvements. The grandeur of the feast naturally varied enormously, depending on the prosperity of the village, the temperament and generosity of the local landowner, or the bounty of the most recent harvest. And it's not merely the food itself, but the entire atmosphere that transforms. There's a palpable lightness in the air, a sense of community, and shared delight that's infectious. People are, well, they're smiling more. There might be rudimentary music, Perhaps a bit of uncoordinated dancing if the local priest is conveniently looking the other way, or has had a bit too much of the festive ale himself. Laughter, a sound often subdued by the daily grind, rings out with more freedom. It's a collective sigh of relief, a brief, blessed intermission from hardship. You see faces unlined by worry, eyes sparkling with a temporary joy. This is the medieval equivalent of a really good potluck, just with slightly higher stakes regarding food safety. But for a taste of roasted pork, some risks are worth taking. Wouldn't you agree a quirky, lesser-known tidbit from the more opulent feasts of the nobility, which occasionally inspired humbler imitations, was the subtlety or subtlety? These were incredibly elaborate food sculptures, often crafted from marzipan, sugar paste, or even jellies, designed more as impressive centerpieces than for actual consumption. They could depict anything from heraldic beasts to complex allegorical scenes, or even miniature castles. Now, you're unlikely to encounter a life-sized sugar sculpture of St. George slaying the dragon at your village gathering. However, the underlying spirit, that of making food special, of presenting it with a little extra care and artistry, might still manifest. Perhaps a loaf of bread is lovingly scored with a festive design, or a pie crust is crimped with unusual precision. Your local subtlety might be as simple as an apple cleverly carved to resemble a slightly surprised-looking fish. But it's the delightful effort, the intention to elevate the meal beyond simple fuel, that truly resonates. The very anticipation of these feast days served as a significant psychological tonic. It provided something to look forward to, a bright spot on a distant horizon to plan for. However modestly, it was a break in the relentless rhythm of labor, a splash of brilliant color on an otherwise muted canvas. You discuss it for days, even weeks in advance, whispering speculations about what delicacies might appear, and afterwards, the memory of it would be carefully hoarded, recounted with fondness, and perhaps embellished just a little with each telling, becoming a golden, sustaining recollection until the next festival rolled around. Do you remember the spiced cider at Michaelmas last year? And those little honey cakes at the harvest feast? They were almost round. Naturally, the true impact of these festive meals on the general health and nutrition of the population is the subject of ongoing discussion among those who study the past. Historians still argue whether the frequency and quality of these common feasts significantly alleviated overall nutritional deficiencies, or if they were too sporadic and fleeting to make a lasting difference to long-term well-being. Were they a genuine dietary supplement, offering a vital boost of calories and nutrients, or merely a tantalizingly brief, joyous interlude that perhaps made the return to the usual meager fare feel even more stark? It's a nuanced debate, but for you, in that precious moment, with a piece of surprisingly decent bread in one hand and a treasured sliver of roasted meat, probably pork, let's be optimistic in the other. Such scholarly considerations are a world away. You are simply, profoundly, in the moment and grateful. These glimpses of plenty are so intensely powerful precisely because of their profound rarity. They starkly illuminate the pervasive scarcity of everyday life by their very contrast. Each sweet bite, each savory, meaty mouthful is a sensory firework, a vivid reminder of what flavors the world can offer, even if it usually withholds them. It's a short, delicious, dreamlike state before you inevitably awaken to the familiar, comforting, if unexciting, embrace of your trusty bowl of pottage. But for now, you eat. You might even drink a little, perhaps some ale that's a bit more potent or fruitier than the standard brew, and you absorb every detail of this fleeting abundance, because tomorrow, it's back to the grind. And that special occasion, bread will be nothing more than a cherished, crumb-laden memory. And so, After all that talk of fields and harvests, of granaries hopefully full, you now find yourself facing a much more personal reality. The frequent, unwelcome guest at your table, or rather, the frequent absence from your table hunger. It's not a dramatic, once-in-a-lifetime event for many. It's more like a dull, persistent ache in your belly, a constant companion, especially during those lean months before the next harvest. Remember those, when the stored grain we talked about dwindles down to almost nothing. You feel that gnawing emptiness, a hollowness that even a good night's sleep, if you can get one in that drafty hut, doesn't quite erase. It's a distraction, isn't it? A fog that settles over your thoughts, making even simple tasks feel monumental. Your energy levels. Let's just say you're not exactly signing up for any marathons. You're operating on reserve power, and that reserve is looking pretty depleted. This isn't just about missing a meal or two, like when you're too busy with, say, doom scrolling on your phone. This is a chronic state, a weariness that seeps into your bones. But it's not just the sheer lack of calories that gets you. Oh no, that would be too simple. It's the malnutrition, nobi sisanan nabalta. Your diet, even when food is available, is often incredibly limited, isn't it? That relentless monotony of whatever staple crop managed to grow. The one we discussed trying to cultivate with those rudimentary tools. Perhaps it's mostly coarse bread, some thin gruel, maybe a few boiled vegetables if you're lucky. You dream of variety, of flavor, but you wake up to the same bland fare. Your modern-day nutritionist would probably have a small, very polite seizure looking at your daily intake. Where are the complex carbohydrates, the lean proteins, the vibrant array of phytonutrients? They'd wail, and you'd just stare blankly, wondering what a phytonutrient is and if it tastes better than dirt. This limited, unbalanced diet has profound health consequences. You start to notice things. Your skin, for instance, might feel unusually dry, perhaps a bit scaly. Small cuts and bruises take forever to heal. You look at your hands, and they seem older than they should. Remember that robust health we imagined when you were toiling in the fields? That feels like a distant memory now. The world starts to feel a bit fuzzy at the edges, doesn't it? That's your brain running on fumes, protesting the lack of essential building blocks. And then come the more specific signs, the calling cards of vitamin deficiencies. You might not know them by their fancy modern names, but you certainly experience their effects. Take scurvy, for example. You might notice your gums are tender. Perhaps they bleed when you try to chew that tough bread. Your teeth might feel a bit loose. Old wounds, ones you thought had healed ages ago, might strangely reopen. It's a deeply unpleasant business, and all for the want of some fresh fruits or vegetables, things that are often a luxury, or entirely unavailable for long stretches. One mainstream historical fact you might recall is the devastating impact of scurvy on sailors during long voyages. But it wasn't just a problem for those at sea. Entire land-bound populations could suffer when fresh produce was scarce, particularly during harsh winters or, of course, famines. You might see children with bowed legs or misshapen chests, a telltale sign of rickets due to a lack of vitamin D and calcium. Not surprising when sunlight is limited by indoor work or long, dark winters, and the diet is poor. Their little bodies just don't have what they need to build strong bones. Pellagra, from niacin deficiency, often seen in populations heavily reliant on corn, could lead to what was grimly known as the 4Ds: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and eventually death. You might see people with strange, symmetrical rashes on skin exposed to sunlight, their minds growing cloudy, their dispositions changing. It's a slow, cruel decline. Historians still argue whether the concept of malnutrition, as we truly understand it, with its nuanced understanding of micronutrients, was even fully grasped by most societies, or if these debilitating conditions were often just chalked up to general weakness, bad air, or even divine punishment. This constant state of undernourishment does a terrible number on your immune system. You become so much more susceptible to disease. That cough that's going around the village. You're far more likely to catch it, and it's far more likely to turn into something serious, something that settles deep in your lungs. A simple infection that a well-nourished person might shake off in a few days could be a death sentence for you. Your body just doesn't have the resources to fight back effectively. It's like trying to defend a castle with no soldiers, no walls, and the gate wide open. Good luck with that. And sometimes, things go from bad to worse. Sometimes, the rains don't come, or they come too much. Sometimes blight strikes the crops, like the infamous potato blight that led to the Great Famine in Ireland and Gortamore in the mid-19th century. A catastrophe that saw over 1 million people perish not just from starvation, but from diseases like typhus, dysentery, and scurvy that preyed on their weakened bodies. When famine strikes, it's not just hunger, it's an absolute devastation of health. Any pre-existing weakness is magnified 100-fold. People become desperate, sometimes eating things they never would otherwise. One particularly grim, quirky, and lesser-known tidbit from times of severe grain shortage is the danger of ergotism, also known as St. Anthony's fire. This was a condition caused by consuming rye, and sometimes other grains, contaminated with the ergot fungus. It could lead to truly horrific symptoms, painful seizures, muscle spasms, diarrhea, itching, and terrifying hallucinations. Some sufferers experienced a burning sensation in their limbs, which could progress to gangrene, causing fingers, toes, and even entire limbs to become mummified and fall off. Imagine enduring all that, perhaps thinking you're cursed or possessed, when it's the very bread you're relying on to survive that's poisoning you. During a famine, the already fragile thread holding you to life becomes terrifyingly thin. Every sunrise is a question mark. Every sunset, a small, uncertain victory if you've made it through another day. The community, already strained, frays further. The sounds of coughing, of weeping, become the soundtrack to your existence. It's a harsh reality, far removed from our modern world of well-stocked supermarkets and dietary supplements. You don't just get a bit peckish. You face a genuine existential threat from the simple, grinding lack of adequate food. And your body, bit by bit, begins to betray you. It's a slow-motion crisis, unfolding daily in the mirror, in the way your clothes hang looser, in the hollows of your cheeks, and in the pervasive, unshakable weariness that colors your every waking moment. You just try to keep going, hoping, somehow, for better days, for a fuller belly, for a return to something resembling health. And so, here you are, at the very end of our long, often rather bland, culinary journey through the medieval peasant's larder. You've walked through those waving fields of rye and barley, almost felt the fine dust from the millstones settle on your skin, and you can probably still taste the phantom flavor of endless, simmering pottage. Remember the sheer, unyielding monotony of it all, that relentless cycle of coarse bread, a few boiled beans or peas, and the occasional, deeply treasured sliver of salted bacon, perhaps hoarded from a pig slaughtered months before. Just like we discussed when talking about feast days versus lean times, it's a universe away from your own pantry, isn't it? Which is likely stocked with a dizzying array of items that would make a medieval peasant's head simply spin. Fragrant spices from continents they never knew existed. Fruits available year-round regardless of season. And let's not forget that wondrous, almost magical substance called chocolate. I bet they'd trade a whole year's turnip harvest for a single bar. The challenges? Well, They were not just occasional hurdles. They were woven into the very fabric of daily existence. It wasn't merely about what they ate, but the immense, backbreaking effort it took to procure even that meager fare. You would have toiled from before the sun even thought about gracing the horizon until long after it had dipped below again. Not for a quarterly bonus or a shiny new phone, but simply for the basic caloric energy required to repeat the entire process the very next day and the day after that. Think about that constant, gnawing uncertainty. A single hailstorm, a prolonged drought, a touch of blight. These weren't just agricultural inconveniences that might affect market prices. They were often the harbingers of widespread starvation, a death sentence whispered on the biting winter wind. Famine, as we've noted, was a recurring, unwelcome character in their life story. A gaunt and grim guest at far too many tables. One rather stark mainstream historical fact that often gets glossed over in romanticized depictions is the sheer percentage of a peasant's income, or, more accurately, their agricultural produce, that was consumed by the necessity of simply staying alive. Sometimes, this figure climbed upwards of 80%, leaving precious little, if anything, for comforts, improvements, or even basic repairs. There was no disposable income for a fancy new scythe, let alone a subscription to a meal kit delivery service. And the realities of such a diet, they were undeniably stark, etched onto their bones and their landscapes. This nutritional foundation, so precariously reliant on a very limited range of staple cereal crops, left entire populations incredibly vulnerable to the whims of nature and disease. We've touched upon how their physical health might have suffered under such a regimen. The constant, heavy physical labor demanding immense reserves of energy, reserves that were often met with insufficient or nutritionally imbalanced food. You can almost feel the phantom aches in your own joints, imagining the wear and tear on their bodies, the chronic pains that never quite faded, the common illnesses that modern medicine now dismisses with a simple antibiotic or a readily available vaccine. Historians still argue whether the so-called Dark Ages were truly as uniformly nutritionally bleak for the average peasant as popular imagination often paints them, with some compelling archaeological and textual evidence pointing to certain periods or specific regions where dietary diversity, especially access to fish or foraged goods, was surprisingly better than expected. But even with these nuances, the baseline existence was undeniably, relentlessly tough. Now, you sit here, perhaps cradling a warm mug of coffee or tea, a delightful snack within easy reach, your smartphone probably buzzing with notifications from any number of food delivery apps, promising culinary delights from around the globe at your doorstep in under an hour. The contrast is so vast, it's almost bewildering, isn't it? Take a moment to truly reflect on what survival meant for them. In their time, on their terms, it wasn't about thriving in the modern sense of self-actualization or personal growth, not in the way we often discuss it. For many, it was about enduring. It was about seeing your children, gaunt though they might be, through another harsh, unforgiving winter. It was about having just enough viable seed grain to plant for the next crucial season, praying it wouldn't fail. It was about the small, almost imperceptible daily victories against a backdrop of seemingly relentless hardship and deprivation. Their world didn't offer a tantalizing buffet of choices. It offered a narrow, often treacherous path, and straying too far from it, by choice or by misfortune, frequently meant disaster. Consider the sheer mental fortitude, the psychological resilience required to face each new day, knowing that your primary meal would likely be a near exact replica of yesterday's and the day before that, and stretching back into a seemingly endless chain of culinary repetition. That's a kind of deep-seated strength, a stoic acceptance that most of us in the modern, developed world are rarely, if ever, called upon to summon. We get mildly irritated if our favorite brand of artisanal sourdough is out of stock at the supermarket, don't we? A genuine tragedy. Imagine their complaint being that the entire village's meager grain supply, the sum total of their sustenance for months, has been consumed by weevils or rotted by unseasonable rain. A quirky and rather fascinating, lesser-known tidbit is that some peasant communities, particularly those in more isolated or resource-poor regions, developed an incredibly sophisticated and nuanced knowledge of wild edibles, a vast pharmacopoeia of fungi, berries, nuts, roots, and various plants, which served as a crucial, if sometimes risky, dietary supplement. This wasn't some trendy gourmet foraging expedition for Instagram. It was a practical, often desperate, measure to stretch the meager harvest just that little bit further, to add a handful of vital nutrients, to stave off the worst pangs of hunger. It was their secret pantry, provided by the wild, though it sometimes came with its own dangers. Their connection to the land, to the rhythms of the seasons, was absolute and non-negotiable. They didn't idly check a weather app on a whim. They felt the coming rain in their aching joints. They read the mood of the sky in the flight of birds. They smelled the subtle shift of the seasons on the wind. Their very survival, day by day, year by year, depended on this intimate, often profoundly brutal, relationship with the natural world. When we casually use the term survival today, it often conjures up dramatic images of wilderness reality shows or elaborate disaster prepping kits. For them, it was just Tuesday or Wednesday or any day that ended in I. The sheer, unremitting physicality of it all, hauling heavy buckets of water from a distant well, the laborious grinding of grain by hand if you were too poor to afford the miller's fees and his often resented share, tending to the few precious animals, mending worn-out tools with whatever materials came to hand. Every single calorie consumed was hard-won. Every scrap of food a direct testament to their sweat and toil. And what about joy? You might wonder, did this stark diet, this life of labor, preclude all forms of joy? Surely not entirely. The community celebrations, the rare feast days we've mentioned, however infrequent they were, must have shone like brilliant beacons in the otherwise muted landscape of their lives. That almost forgotten taste of properly roasted meat, the intense sweetness of a honeycomb snatched from a wild hive, the camaraderie of shared homebrewed ale. These experiences would have been moments of profound, almost overwhelming pleasure, their intensity magnified by their very rarity. But the everyday baseline reality was a grind, a constant, wearying negotiation with hunger, fatigue, and the elements. So, as you now metaphorically step back from this historical pantry, as we conclude this long, detailed look at what sustained so many people for so many centuries, what final thoughts do you take away with you into the quiet of your evening? Perhaps it's a deeper, more visceral appreciation for the almost unimaginable abundance and variety that surrounds you in your modern life. Maybe it's a quiet, newfound respect for the quiet, uncelebrated resilience of those who came before us, those who carved out meaningful lives in communities from so very little. Their world was one of profound constraints, of hard, unyielding limits, of a daily high-stakes gamble against the elements, against disease, against simple misfortune. Your world, for all its own unique complexities and anxieties, offers a spectrum of choice, comfort, and nutritional security that they could scarcely have dreamed of, let alone experienced. It's something profound to ponder, isn't it? The immense, almost unfathomable gulf that separates their humble, often meager, table from the astonishing bounty available at yours. And so, our journey through the quiet echoes of the past, exploring the essence of peasant sustenance, gently comes to its close for tonight. Let the lingering images of those simple earthen kitchens and the imagined taste of that coarse modern vital bread slowly begin to fade now. Like the last embers of a dying hearth fire, feel the weight of their world, the quiet strength of their survival, settling softly around you, not as a burden, but as a gentle reminder of how far we've traveled. May your dreams be filled with comfort and a touch more gratitude for the abundance that graces your own table. Sleep well now,